Hi, it's Frank. I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about a new melody today. This is the one called the Star-Spangled Banner, the American National Anthem. This is a great example of what happens when you eschew some of the characteristics I talk about that are associated with vocal melody writing. So recall that those three characteristics had to do with the idea that we are most often looking at staying within a certain range of about an octave. We're also looking to do more stepping than skipping. And finally, we're looking at constructing sections of melody that are usually short. You're looking at a total of 2 to 4 measures, for instance, quite often as far as being the extreme. So the Star-Spangled Banner, and there's a link to this version of it in the actual description for the video. So if you want to follow along, feel free to click on that. Immediately breaks 2 of those guidelines. In fact, it does it in the very opening of the song. Within the first 2 measures, we've covered the tonic triad. And again, here we're in the key of E, I should mention. Covered the whole octave right there by the time we start the second measure, before then moving immediately beyond that octave. Skipping down a 6 to get back to the dominant. Repeating that note in measure 4. Skipping up a 6 to get to the G sharp again. Skipping down a 4th. Then the triad again, meaning skipping in thirds. So that's the first 8 measures of this. And by the way, if you're not familiar with reading first ending, second ending, you're being told that by those dots in measure 1, measure 8, that you're going to repeat going back to measure 1. But when you get to measure 8, instead of playing it a second time, you're going to skip to measure 9. That's what the 2 with the bracket over it tells us. That's a so-called second ending. That's usually done just to save from having to rewrite a part that just is being repeated as is. But again, getting back to looking at the melody, most of what's going on in those first 8 measures is skipping around, the so-called disjunct movement, which generally we try to avoid, but obviously this song embraces. Beyond that, of course, we also have this idea that we are looking at the range, total range from low to high. I already mentioned how we have the whole octave laid out within the first 2 measures, and we immediately go past that up a third. In fact, if you include measure 10, you'll see that what we have down there on the page is G sharp, A and B, above that second octave of E. So that's halfway toward another octave of E. That means that we're spanning the total range from low to high of an octave and a half. So again, the idea that you have to stay within a certain range when you're crafting a vocal melody or working with any melody isn't necessarily the case. You can always do something different. And arguably, that's part of what made this song so famous. Now, if you've ever tried to sing this yourself, or you happen to know a vocalist, if you aren't one who has, you'll know that it is a very tricky melody to execute exactly right. And that's exactly for the reasons mentioned. Because there is a lot of skipping around, a lot of disjunct versus conjunct movement. And in addition to that, you're spanning more than an octave, and you're doing so at various places throughout. Now, the one element here that is close to what we talked about in those 3 characteristics was the idea that we're written in short segments. The melody is written in short segments. If you look at the first half note and where it appears, it's just as you get to that high note. So you have a chance to take another breath. And then before you get to the B at the end of the 4th measure, the dominant note, there's another half note. That's the case with a lot of the way this is written. Usually you're thinking in 2-measure segments. Not always, of course, but often. And that's one redeeming characteristic that does make this somewhat singable. Again, if you haven't tried it yourself, give it a try and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a lot of jumping around, and it's doing so in a way where it's offset only slightly by the stepwise motion and notes that are found here and there. Again, it can be a challenging piece, but it's a memorable one, and it's worth pointing out that the simple fact is, even though you're ignoring things like the within an octave or the stepping or skipping movement ideas, the truth is you're still creating something pretty interesting here. I mean, obviously the song's been around for over 100 years at this point, right? So the truth is something about it has stuck around and been able to sort of burrow its way into people's brains. Many people, certainly in this country, will know the song. And even though it may be hard to sing, there's some part of almost all of us that allows us to go ahead and hum along with this, partly because those skips are so memorable. So again, I just wanted to offer this as a kind of contrast to the previous video where I explicitly talked about the idea that, these characteristics have been the guiding principles really of vocal melody writing for hundreds of years. That's true, but that's not to say ever that you need to adhere solely to that. interesting things come out of variations or sometimes complete contrast. We see a good bit of that here, of course. Well, that's it for this week. I just wanted to go ahead and again offer a little bit of a contrast. Hopefully I did that. We'll plan to look at some other melodies beginning with the next video. Take care.